The modern mainstream narrative frames remote work as a noble rebellion against corporate tyranny. It is a highly seductive illusion, but a cold structural analysis reveals a completely different mechanism. You did not escape the system. You simply outsourced the physical friction of your existence to a lower socioeconomic class so you could remain insulated. The grid was never dismantled. The extraction was merely sanitized. Euphemisms like work-life balance and sovereign schedule operate as intellectual bailouts designed to neutralize economic guilt. The majority celebrates this cultural shift as a victory for human autonomy, remaining completely blind to a basic systemic reality. This personal liberation is mathematically impossible to sustain without a human shield of essential physical workers. When an affluent worker avoids the urban center, a predictable chain reaction occurs. It becomes an uncredited micro-eviction of the local service economy. Capital that historically circulated through dry cleaners, independent diners, and transit workers now pools stagnantly inside a digital account. The flow of wealth has not been democratized. It has simply been frozen at the top. This is not a corporate conspiracy engineered by commercial real estate moguls to control human behavior. This is pure thermodynamic mathematics. A civilization cannot sustain localized wealth distribution when its highest earning cognitive class permanently retreats into the suburbs, demanding that the physical universe serve them exclusively through an app interface. Data from macroeconomic audits confirms a foundational law. Communities do not disintegrate from a lack of resources. They disintegrate from a lack of physical velocity. By removing the high-earning individual from the public transit grid, the entire economic pyramid begins to mutate. The mainstream narrative labels this transition as progress. Objective logic defines it as hyper-localized capital hoarding. The lifestyle operates on a profound moral deficit, one that relies entirely on a collective blind spot regarding the economic food chain. Discarding the workplace wellness brochures reveals the raw, clinical autopsy of a society that systematically traded human cohesion for absolute convenience. Because while you are busy collecting praise on LinkedIn for optimizing your daily workflow, the foundational economy is quietly drafting a structural invoice. An invoice that your digital privilege can no longer afford to pay. Urban survival, particularly among the lower levels of society, depends entirely on the velocity of money. The frequency with which a single unit of currency changes hands within a local ecosystem, inside a 24-hour cycle. In a dense municipal center, capital brought in by the high-earning cognitive class cascades mechanically, paying the barista, funding the commercial laundry, supporting the public transit system. Remote work interrupts this friction, stopping the cascade before it ever begins. Confining capital to digital retail interfaces and suburban delivery infrastructures reduces the localized economic multiplier to absolute zero. Funds spent through a software platform instantly exit the immediate geography, pooling directly into distant corporate accounts. The physical working class can't simply pivot into digital consulting. Their survival requires something far more basic: the physical presence of the wealthy. The mainstream assumption that service labor can simply migrate to the suburbs ignores the fundamental constraints of spatial geography. Suburban topography is engineered for isolation, not commercial density.
A family-owned business cannot sustain fixed operational costs on a scattered customer base that only appears from residential clusters a few times a week. The suburban grid is optimized to hoard capital. The city grid is built to distribute it.
The structural friction inevitably creates the low-wage mobility trap. As commercial real estate tax revenues collapse from vacant office infrastructure, municipalities are forced to reduce public transit budgets. The very transport systems required by service workers to access employment are dismantled, offsetting the deficit left behind by the absent affluent class. The remote worker optimizes their morning routine, while the janitor's commute doubles in time and cost. The white-collar tier retains metropolitan salaries while refusing to pay the physical tax of being present inside the ecosystem that validates their wealth. They extract the premium value of urban aggregation from a distance, abandoning the physical maintenance, the systemic risk, and the economic decay to those who lack the financial capacity to live behind a digital firewall. A parasite cannot permanently outgrow its host without structural consequence. The decay of the urban center is not an isolated municipal line item. It is a fundamental reconfiguration of the tectonic plates of capital. Starving the physical foundation long enough guarantees one outcome. The resulting seismic shift travels vertically upward through the entire economic pyramid. The physical workforce will not quietly dissolve into the background of a video conference. The starvation of the city center is completing a systemic feedback loop, one designed to breach the digital fortress exactly where it hurts. The structural rot hidden by the remote work framework extends far beyond empty office complexes. It operates within the silent degradation of informal compensation networks. Macroeconomic analysis indicates that a significant portion of the modern workforce now relies entirely on gig and service infrastructure to secure baseline survival. Historically, physical proximity allowed direct, unmediated transfers of capital through cash-based economies and informal tipping. The transition to a remote lifestyle changes more than location. It forces every interaction through a corporate digital filter. Behavioral metrics reveal a devastating psychological anomaly. When physical transactions are replaced by flat-fee digital interfaces, social compensation norms begin to collapse. When consumers interact with service labor through a sterile application interface, the willingness to provide additional incentives declines. The data reflects a measurable reduction in tipping behavior for app-mediated couriers. The cognitive elite optimizes daily expenditure, while the physical worker absorbs the hidden cost, losing a significant portion of real income through the erosion of organic social friction. This is the mechanics of the spatial extraction paradox. The remote professional operates under the assumption that consumption remains locally neutral because the restaurant is still located nearby. But the corporate intermediation leak remains invisible. Platform systems extract value from the transaction before it ever reaches the local worker. The financial burden is shifted onto both the consumer and the lower-tier laborer. By centralizing daily life behind a screen, the affluent class has effectively algorithmized the extraction of wealth from its immediate geographic neighbors. The macroeconomic reality becomes deeper when examining municipal tax structures. Cities do not fund public services through personal income tax alone. They rely heavily on commercial real estate assessments and the micro-revenues generated by daily transit activity. A sustained reduction in commuter volume creates a compounding deficit, forcing cities to reduce underground transit frequency and public mobility.
The remote elite maintains hypermobility through private vehicles and suburban infrastructure, while the physical service worker faces a transit system that becomes slower, more expensive, and increasingly unreliable.
The mainstream debate frames this structural shift as a decentralized utopian revolution. It is an operational falsehood. Wealth is not being redistributed across the map. It is being concentrated into fewer, more isolated hands. When physical capital disappears from public spaces, the informal economic velocity that historically supported working-class communities is deleted. The remote economy replaces organic circulation with a rigid, corporate-monitored hierarchy, where every fragment of capital is tracked, taxed, and restricted before it ever reaches the bottom.
The unyielding conclusion is that your home office setup functions as a highly efficient socioeconomic insulation chamber. It allows the cognitive elite to enjoy the physical benefits of human labor without ever directly interacting with the people providing it. This is not progress. It is a deeper economic separation disguised as a wellness trend. The structural equilibrium cannot sustain this level of division forever. Eventually, the system demands correction. Because history demonstrates one unavoidable pattern. When the physical foundation of an economy is starved of velocity for too long, it does not simply stop working. It pushes back against the invisible structures sitting safely behind the firewall. The trajectory of capital starvation follows an unyielding biological law. When the organic body begins to decay, the necrosis inevitably reaches the heart. The cognitive elite, operating from suburban fortresses, assumes immunity from urban degradation. This is a fatal computational error. The collapse of metropolitan tax bases directly impacts municipal bond markets, causing cities to default on essential infrastructure obligations. When public credit ratings freeze, the cost of municipal debt rises, forcing the degradation of physical security, sanitation, and power systems. The very systems that support the data centers, keeping your remote terminal online. Simultaneously, the algorithmization of service labor triggers what industrial analysts call the asymmetrical automation paradox. As physical workers lose their remaining profit margins through platform systems, the labor pool does not collapse through traditional rebellion. It dissolves through economic displacement. The solution is not higher wages. It is accelerated automation. The delivery worker is replaced by an autonomous drone network, removing the final remaining bridge of capital transfer between classes, leaving the service tier trapped inside a permanent economic dead zone. The ultimate feedback loop operates through the very mechanism that enabled remote autonomy, the optimization of labor tracking. By proving to the corporate structure that cognitive work can be performed with maximum efficiency from an isolated domestic terminal, you have standardized the conditions for your own replacement. If a white-collar role does not require physical presence, it loses geographic value. The infrastructure built to support your personal flexibility is the same pipeline used to outsource entire departments across the globe. You did not liberate your time. You converted your position into a global commodity. History confirms one fundamental principle. An economic elite cannot permanently separate itself from the physical foundation of production. The current remote work paradigm is not a permanent evolution of labor. It is a temporary macroeconomic anomaly, supported by cheap capital and digital optimization. When the physical foundation of civilization is systematically deprived of velocity, the structure above it does not remain suspended. It corrects. And that correction is never purely digital. It is physical, aggressive, and unavoidable.
Drop the progressive language of digital liberation. Look beyond the sterile interface of your workflow application and examine the raw invoice behind your convenience. You are not building a decentralized utopia. You are participating in an extraction mechanism that cannot sustain itself indefinitely. The walls of your home office are not a fortress. They are an isolation chamber, a temporary barrier delaying the impact of a larger systemic collision.
The calculation is entering its final iteration. The physical economy will not disappear into the background noise of your next video conference. The structural invoice has already been drafted. The velocity has already been interrupted. And the system is preparing to settle the account. The only remaining question is simple. How much will your digital privilege cost when the physical world demands payment in full? The data reveals the structural friction. The numbers are indifferent to personal comfort. If you believe your remote autonomy exists outside this causal chain, define your math in the comments. Prove the anomaly.